Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodhanandana Brajajanaranjana Yashodhanandana Brajajanaranjana Yamunatiravanachari Yamunatiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashtapraishu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utamashloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. So nice to be here. We're going to continue our study of Uddhava Gita. Today we have a new chapter. It's chapter 26 of the 11th canto, titled Aila Gita. Do you usually read the summary in the beginning, or not necessary?
Read the verses, but if there's too many of the verses, you can summarize that.
Okay. Well, we have the whole chapter, so we'll skip the summary. We can just do the verses. Do I start with the first one and then? Okay, sure. Supreme Personality of Godhead said, having achieved this human form of life, which affords one the opportunity to realize me, and being situated in my devotional service, one can achieve me, the reservoir of all pleasure, and the supreme soul of all existence, residing within the heart of every living being.
A person fixed in transcendental knowledge is freed from conditioned life by giving up his false identification with the products of the material modes of nature. Seeing these products as simply illusion, he avoids entanglement with the modes of nature, although constantly among them. Because the modes of nature and their products are simply not real, he does not accept them.
One should never associate with materialists those dedicated to gratifying their genitals and bellies. By following them, one falls into the deepest pit of darkness, just like a blind man who follows another blind man.
Actually, I just want to pause for a second. Anita was saying that Venus, is it your first time here for a Bhagavatam class? For the first time for the morning class. Are you familiar with the book that we're reading from, Bhagavatam? A little bit. This book. So I just want to summarize a little bit, just so you have some context of what we're studying. So every day in the morning we study one of our scriptures called Srimad Bhagavatam, and it's a very vast scripture. It's divided into 12 cantos or 18 volumes, and the story behind it is that there was a king named Parikshit, and he was a very saintly king. He was emperor of the world, but he was cursed. There was a certain scenario that happened, and he was cursed to die within 7 days. And so the idea is, okay, what does he do if he's cursed to die? What does someone do who has a death sentence, essentially? And which leads to the question, what's the purpose of life? So he immediately sought out a guru. He went to the banks of the Ganga, renounced his whole kingly life, and was just ready to take spiritual life very seriously. And so it's a conversation of 7 days of his teacher, Shukadev Goswami, and him. And there's many other saints and people assembled. And so they talk about many things, but the main subject matter is glorification of God and the stories of God and his devotees, and certain tribulations they go through, certain ways that teach them lessons in taking shelter of the Lord. And so there's many stories and stories within stories and conversations within conversations. So right now we're reading sort of towards the end of this compilation. It's the 11th canto, so there's 12 cantos towards the end. And it's about Krishna, who's speaking to one of his best friends, Uddhava, and he's just telling him a lot of wisdom, essentially. And in this part of the book, he's quoting different stories to kind of give different points and bring about certain spiritual subject matter that he finds is really important for him to know. So this one in particular, we'll go through all the text so you get the story. I'll just give you a little word of caution. It's a little interesting, and there may be some text that made you think, that's interesting, or that's a little bit intense, but we'll go through it and we'll talk a bit about some of these things and give some context after we finish reading. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Was sung by the famous Emperor Purva. When deprived of his wife, Urashi, he was at first bewildered, but by controlling his lamentation, he began to feel detachment.
When she was leaving him, even though he was naked, he ran after her just like a madman and called out in great distress, "Oh, my wife! Oh, terrible lady! Please stop!"
Although for many years, Pururava had enjoyed sex pleasure in the evening hours, still he was not satisfied by such insignificant enjoyment. His mind was so attracted to Urvashi that he did not notice how the nights were coming and going.
King Aila said, "Alas, just see the extent of my delusion. This goddess was embracing me and held my neck in her grip. My heart was so polluted by lust that I had no idea how my life was passing."
That lady cheated me so much that I did not even see the rising or setting of the sun. Alas, for so many years I passed my days in vain.
Alas, although I am supposed to be a mighty emperor, the crown jewel of all kings on this earth, just see how my bewilderment has rendered me a toy animal in the hands of women.
Although I was a powerful lord with great opulence, that woman gave me up as if I were no more than an insignificant blade of grass. And still, naked and without shame, I followed her, crying out to her like a madman.
Where are my so-called great influence, power, and sovereignty, just like Nas being kicked in the face by this she ass I ran after that woman who already given me up.
What is the use of a big education or the practice of austerities and renunciation? And what is the use of studying religious scriptures, of living in solitude and silence, if after all that, one's mind is stolen by a woman?
To hell with me. I am such a fool that I didn't even know what was good for me, although I arrogantly thought I was highly intelligent. Although I achieved the exalted position of a lord, I allowed myself to be conquered by a woman as if I were a bullock or a jackass.
The lips of Urvasi for so many years. My lusted desires kept rising again and again within my heart and were never satisfied. Just like fire that can never be extinguished by the oblation of ghee poured into the flames.
Who but the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who lies beyond material perception and is the Lord of self-satisfied sages, can possibly save my consciousness, which has been stolen by a prostitute?
Because I allowed my intelligence to become dull, and because I failed to control my senses, the great confusion in my mind did not go away. Even the Urvashi herself gave me wise counsel with well-spoken words.
How can I blame her for my trouble when I am ignorant of my real spiritual nature? I did not control my senses, and so I am like a person who mistakenly sees a harmless rope as a snake.
Notice how his perception's starting to change a little bit.
What is this polluted body anyway? So filthy and full of bad odors. I was attracted by the fragrance and beauty of a woman's body, but what are those so-called attractive features? They are simply a false covering created by illusion.
Yeah, he goes from a victim mentality to a little bit of taking responsibility / getting kind of philosophical. So please go ahead.
One can never decide whose property the body actually is. Does it belong to one's parents, who have given birth to it, to one's wife, who gives it pleasure, or to one's employer, who orders the body around? Is it the property of the funeral fire or of the dogs and jackals who may ultimately devour it? Is it the property of the indwelling soul who partakes in its happiness and distress? Or does the body belong to intimate friends who encourage and help it? Although a man never definitely ascertains the proprietor of the body, he becomes most attached to it. The material body is a polluted material form, heading toward a lowly destination. Yet when a man stares at the face of a woman, he thinks, what a good-looking lady, what a charming nose she's got, and see her beautiful smile.
What a difference there is between ordinary worms and persons who try to enjoy this material body composed of skin, flesh, blood, muscle, fat, marrow, bone, stool, urine, and pus.
Yet even one who theoretically understands the actual nature of the body should never associate with women or with men attached to women. After all, the contact of the senses with their objects inevitably agitates the mind.
Because the mind is not disturbed by that which is neither seen nor heard, the mind of a person who restricts the material senses will automatically be checked in its material activities and become pacified.
Therefore, one should never let his senses associate freely with women or with men attached to women. Even those who are highly learned cannot trust the 6 enemies of the mind. What to speak then of foolish persons like me?
The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, having thus chanted this song, Maharaj Parava, emanate among the demigods and human beings, gave up the position he had achieved in the planet of Urvashi. His illusion cleansed away by transcendental knowledge, he understood me to be the Supreme Soul within his heart, and so at last achieved peace.
An intelligent person should therefore reject all bad association and instead take up the association of saintly devotees, whose words cut off the excessive attachment of one's mind.
My devotees fix their minds upon me and do not depend upon anything material. They are always peaceful, endowed with equal vision, and free from possessiveness, false ego, duality, and greed.
O greatly fortunate Uddhava, in the association of such saintly devotees, there is constant discussion of me, and those partaking in this chanting and hearing of my glories are certainly purified of all sins.
Hears, chants, and respectfully takes to heart these topics about me, becomes faithfully dedicated to me, and thus achieves my devotional service.
What more remains to be accomplished for the perfect devotee after achieving devotional service unto me, the Supreme Absolute Truth, whose qualities are innumerable and who I am the embodiment of all ecstatic experience?
Just as cold, fear, and darkness are eradicated for one who has approached the sacrificial fire, so dullness, fear, and ignorance are destroyed for one engaged in serving the devotees of the Lord.
The devotees of the Lord, peacefully fixed in absolute knowledge, are the ultimate shelter for those who are repeatedly rising and falling within the fearful ocean of material life. Such devotees are just like a strong boat that comes to rescue persons who are at the point of drowning.
Just as food is the life of all creatures, just as I am the ultimate shelter for the distressed, and just as religion is the wealth of those who are passing away from this world, so my devotees are the only refuge of persons fearful of falling into a miserable condition of life.
My devotees bestow divine eyes, whereas the sun allows only external sight, and that only when it is risen in the sky. My devotees are one's real worshipful deities and real family. They are one's own self, and ultimately they are not different from me.
Thus, losing his desire to be on the same planet as Ujjva, Maharaj Purava began to wander the earth free of all material association and completely satisfied within the self.
Interesting, huh? We're going to, I'm just going to read the text 26, the Sanskrit and translation, and focus on that a little bit. Do you do call and response with the verse? Tato du sangam ut shrija. Tato du sangam ut shrija. Satsu sajeda buddhiman. Santa evasya chindanti. Manovya sangam uktibhi. Tato du sangam utrija. Satsu sajeta buddhiman. Santa evasya chindanti. Manovya sangam uktibhi. Santa evasya chindanti Manavya Sangamukti
Dodo Sangam Utsrijya Susajjeta Buddhima
Susajjeta Buddhima
Santa Evasya Chindanti
Santevasya Chintanti
Manovya Sangamukti
Manavya Sangamukti
Tato Sangam Utsritya Satsu Sajeta Buddhiman
Satsu Sajjeta Buddhiman
Sandaivasya Chintanti
Santevasya Chintanti
Manovya Sangamukti
Manavya Sangamukti. Word for word? Tata. Oh, together, okay. Tata, therefore, do Sangam, bad association. Utsrijya, throwing away. Satsu, to saintly devotees. Sajeta, you should become attached. Buddhiman, one who is intelligent. Santa, saintly persons. Only. Asa, Shindanti, cut off. Manaha, of the mind. Via Sangam, excessive attachment. Uktivhi, by their words. Translation. An intelligent person should therefore reject all bad association and instead take up the association of saintly devotees, whose words cut off the excessive attachment of one's mind. Om Jnanatimrandasya Janashalakaya Chakshurumilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shri Mate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Prachayane Visesha Shunyavani Pastyatu Deshatadine Vancha Kalpa Drupyascha Kripa Sindhurve Vishaktitanam Pavanubhyo Vaishnavesha. So, this story is actually mentioned twice in the Bhagavatam. It's mentioned first in the 9th canto, but it's also mentioned in other scriptures. It's mentioned in Mahabharata. And I find it interesting whenever either stories repeat themselves in Shastra or verses repeat themselves. Because just to be included in something like Srimad Bhagavatam, there must be such importance to that verse, that story, that section. So for it to be repeated twice, there's definitely something that we have to catch here. So I want to summarize what's in the 9th canto, because the 9th canto is kind of the backstory, because it sort of jumps right in. This is called Aila Gita. Aila refers to King Pururava, and Gita means song or the words of. So it's sort of the song of his lamentation, his realizations that he's sharing. And this is what Krishna wants to pull and share this specifically with Uddhava. So he finds this very important. But to really understand where he's coming from and his sentiment, that he hear his whole story. So he was a great emperor, a great king, very prosperous dynasty, full of opulence, wealth, austerity, everything that you have in a saintly king. And something you see often in the Bhagavatam is that you see people with a pious upbringing or good situation, but they fall in the wrong association and they fall down from that good situation. They make bad decisions. So actually, it was Urvashi. She's a Gandharva from the heavenly planets, and she was captured by the beauty of the king. And they became married. She lived with him, and eventually she had left. Basically, there was a whole story. But anyway, she left to go back to Gandharva Loka, to the heavenly planets. And it made this king absolutely crazy. I mean, he was like, this is the essence of being like head over heels over a girl. This is like the essence of just being totally infatuated to the extreme degree. And so he was going crazy. He was searching all over the world, and they met, and she said, okay, well, we can meet once a year, and that once a year we can have children, and we'll meet in Kurukshetra. So they met one year, and then he wasn't satisfied. No, I want to be with you every day. What can I do? And so he said, okay, well, she said, you're from Earth, I'm from the heavenly planets. Worship the people of my of my planet, the Gandharvas, and see if they're satisfied. Maybe they can arrange something. Because ultimately it was those from the heavenly planets that brought her back. So being satisfied with this answer, he goes to the Gandharvas. Gandharvas gave him a woman who looked just like her, but it wasn't her. And so at first he thought it was her, and then he realized it wasn't. And he was really upset. And then he did some kind of austerity, which essentially led him back to go to Gandharva Loka. So all this trying so hard just to be with this woman. Finally, he's back there. And the chapter ends. And it almost seems like, what's the point of what did we just read? That was in the 9th canto. But it was to be continued, and Krishna brought it up here. And he was saying he finally gets what he desired. Then he realized it wasn't really what he wanted. He realized this is the cause of so much suffering. And I think it's interesting because the Bhagavatam, there's the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is one of our main scriptures also, and it's also Krishna speaking to Arjuna. And Krishna in that book is giving a lot of wisdom, but it's not elaborated as long as the Bhagavatam is. So in the Bhagavatam, we're able to elaborate on certain points and see it in real life scenarios. And the point here is not that this chapter is degrading women, this chapter is talking low about women, even though it seems out of his frustration he's speaking that way. It's highlighting lust. This whole chapter is highlighting lust and the detriments of lust. And when you buy into lust, where does it take you? What's the path, the cycle of it? And then it speaks about how do you curb lust? What's the remedy for it? And that's where this verse comes in. So I want to go a little bit through this chapter in terms of lust and also finish in terms of association. So Arjuna asked Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? Meaning, why does someone do something sinful, even if they aren't intending to? It's not their intention to do something sinful, almost as if they're forced to. How come this happens? Krishna very famously responds, Kama esha krodha esha rajaguna samudbhavaha. And he said, it is lust only, Arjuna, only by lust, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion that later gets transformed into wrath, which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. Let's think about that in terms of what we just read. It is by lust only, comes in contact with the material mode of passion. There's so much lust in this king's heart, and so much passion. And what did that turn into? One of the verses, he was running naked, chasing after her, yelling, angry, where are you going, terrible woman? Where are you going? It was lust transformed into wrath, which is the all-devouring sinful enemy. He says, everything pious I've done, I gave it up because I was so infatuated by my lust. It was the all-devouring sinful enemy. It devoured everything about him. Everything good about him became covered by it. And so lust essentially is, in the material world, is the perverted reflection of pure transcendental love. When it's covered by modes of material nature, it becomes lust. And to different degrees of lust, it's Krishna also describes a little bit later on in Bhagavad Gita that it's never satisfied and it burns like fire. And so I find it really interesting when we study Bhagavad Gita and then you read in Srimad Bhagavatam, you can make the connection. And we make a connection in Shastra, we make a connection in scriptures. Then it starts to become a little bit of a realization in us. We can see something and then we can see an application. The next step, if we can take that and see the application in our own life, then we can actually transform the knowledge into some kind of behavior. So it's so blatant, right? And you see this in society too. Someone is just completely infatuated by the wrong association. Maybe it's, the opposite sex, maybe it's money, maybe it's prestige, and it takes them down a rabbit hole. So this is, first, I don't know if you noticed, he's lamenting and he's blaming her. It's a little bit in the victim mentality. This is her fault. She seduced me. And he's speaking like this, and then he realizes, no, actually, she even warned me about this. It's my fault. I bought into this idea. So he takes responsibility. And one thing I found really interesting about this is that Krishna also speaks in Bhagavad Gita about thinking, feeling, and willing. This process of going from thoughts to action. And he states, when contemplating the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them. So by thinking comes attachment. And from such attachment, lust develops. And from lust, anger arises. It continues. From anger, complete delusion arises. And from delusion, complete bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost. And when intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material pool. So again, it really describes the situation here. Contemplating the objects of the senses, he's thinking about her, develops attachment, but it's not attachment in a healthy way. It's attachment to the body. It's attachment driven by the senses, and therefore lust develops, and this whole cycle continues. And so last year I was at this youth retreat in America, and devotee Radha Bhakti was giving a class, and it was really nice, and she was speaking of this thinking, feeling, willing in terms of something modern day, because the continuum continues. It's thinking, feeling, willing, and then what? And so she gave this example of a corporate worker. If there's someone in a corporate position who's trying to get a leg up, get a raise, get a higher position. So she used this example, thinking. So first he thinks, okay, I want a promotion. And this, he starts contemplating this, and he sees someone in the company, does a presentation for the company for a certain section, and he thinks, okay, well, I made one slide in this presentation. Maybe I'll just say I created the whole presentation, and I'll tell the boss that. And so the person does so, and I think it's not really untrue, I helped a little bit, I'm just bending the truth a little bit. So they're willing to take credit for the whole thing. So what does that lead to? Well, eventually it leads to them, okay, the boss sees it, maybe gives them a raise, maybe some more visibility, and the person sees, okay, I thought I'm gonna do this, I'm willing to make this step, and so it leads to a certain behavior. Now they're okay with cheating a little bit, and they do it again and again to get more visibility, more money, to get higher in the company. It becomes a habit, and when habits form enough, it becomes character. So that's what's happening with King Pururava here. It's becoming his habit. At first, he's just contemplating the senses. He's attached to this person, Urvashi, but as it becomes more and more, even when she leaves and comes in an agreement that we can meet once a year, she's still so attached, or he's still so attached, because it's become a habit, it's become part of his character, that he's forgotten the rest of who he actually was. So we may not, it's very subtle, we may not see the bud of lust, the start of it, where it comes from. But before we know it, it can become into a full-grown flower, a full-grown bush. So Bhagavatam here is stating that we have to nip it in the bud. We have to see what's leading to lust and how can we stop it. So it brings us to this point here today about association. An intelligent person should therefore reject all bad association and instead take up the association of saintly devotees, whose words cut off the excessive attachment of one's mind. So this is Krishna's conclusion. He states the song of Aila, his story, and he tells Uddhava. So in conclusion, this is the moral of the story. To reject bad association and take up association of saintly devotees. And I was reading this and I thought, it kind of sounds like a cop-out answer. You can really apply this answer to many problems, or just probably you need better association. You need association of devotees. What's the remedy? You need association. And we often stop the answer there. The answer is association. But do we really think about what that means? What is association? How to have association? And I was thinking in terms of my life that, okay, I've been in the Krishna consciousness movement since I was born. So 26 years. I've had association with devotees every single day of my life, except for maybe one weekend in high school. I went on a trip with my sports team. Maybe the only time I was away from devotees. I've had devotee sangha every single day of my life. So I was thinking, okay, Shastra says, sadhu sangha, sarva shastra kai, lava matra sadhu sangha, sarva siddhi hai. From a moment's association, from just a moment of such association with devotees, one can receive the seed of all perfection. So I've had many moments, I've had many years. Where am I? How come I'm still not perfected yet? How come I still have so many material desires? How come I still have lust in my heart? So it made me think about, what is association really? Is it just a cliche, or should I think about it more deeply? My goal with this discussion is that we can think about association a little bit differently, with a different perspective. So association is a 24/7 thing. We are associating with something or someone every moment of the day. We're either associating with another person, we're either in contact physically, we are associating with some kind of sound vibration. It could be media, it could just be what we hear, it could be something visual. We could be associating with our mind's voice. Our minds is composed of the impressions that we get from all the things I just said. So we're associating 24/7. So if you think about our association like a weight scale, in India, when you buy vegetables, they have these scales. And on one side, they put all the vegetables, and on the other side, they put some weight, and they try to balance it out. So as much of vegetables as you have, they see how heavy it is, and they charge you accordingly. So if I'm looking at all my association throughout the day, and what I consume, and then I take how much of I'm associating with something Krishna conscious, reading, hearing Bhagavatam, chanting Hare Krishna, being with devotees, taking prasadam, where is the balance at? In my life, I feel the balance of something material is a lot higher, and the balance of something spiritual is a lot lower. So that's something to keep in thought when we think about association. What's the quantity of it actually? Okay, I'm with devotees. Maybe I'm attending class once a week. But what about the other, 23 hours a day, 6 other days a week? What about that? Where is that association? So every day, every moment of the day, there's some association. It's constant. So when we associate with devotees, then the process of Krishna consciousness, in association, we're essentially saying yes to spiritual life. We're saying, yes, Krishna, I'm making an effort to associate with something spiritual, to associate with your devotees, to associate with the holy name, to read Shastra. I'm making an effort towards you. When I'm making an effort towards them, we have to say no to something. When we say yes to Krishna, what are we saying no to? And that's the other side of the scale. So we're saying yes to the scale that tips it this way. We have to say no to the scale that goes down this way. So you have to ask yourself, how much of our association, is it negative? Is it downgrading? Is it degrading? Is it materialistic? Does it bring you closer to Krishna? Does it bring you further away? And not just the people around, but the sound vibration you're listening to, what you're seeing with your eyes, what kind of thoughts you're having, and how much of your association is positive, how much of it is uplifting, how much of it is inherently actually spiritual, and one has to outweigh the other. So it comes back to this thinking, feeling, willing idea. So if we're associating with something 24/7, then we need a lot of Krishna conscious association constantly, because that would change our thoughts, which ultimately change the way we feel about things, ultimately change the type of actions we will take, because they're based off association with spirit rather than matter, based off association with things that are connected to Krishna rather than connected to the material world. So eventually, our behavior and our character changes. And I was also thinking about this in terms of what this verse is saying. It says, and instead take up the association of saintly devotees. Specifically saintly devotees, or sadhu sangha. And this is, there's, you might ask, well, how often do we get the opportunity to take the association of very advanced devotees? Depending on where we live, maybe someone lives in a remote area, it's not so easy. But it has to be something, we have to make an effort in our lives, as much as we make an effort in other relationships or other endeavors, or maybe it's a getaway or a vacation, something for ourselves to unwind. We have to make that endeavor to seek out association. Tajra Maharaj told me once that he had a discussion about association, and he was saying you have to schedule your year in such a way that association is the priority, that who you want to spend time with is the priority. He said Tamal Krishna Maharaj would make his schedule of the year in such a way that he knew where he wanted to be with who. That was his priority. I want to be with these people at this time. I want to see this person once a year. I want to associate with my god brothers here and be at this festival here with this person. And that's how he adjusted his life. That was the priority. And Bhagavatam also states, Nityam Bhagavata Sevya, that every day, regularly serving Srimad Bhagavatam, this is a way of association. We associate with Srila Prabhupada's words and his purports and his commentaries, and we associate with the words of our acharyas and the Supreme Lord himself. So this is constant association. And it has so much potency as well. Lately I've been reading the 6th canto of Bhagavatam. So there's a story earlier on of Ajamil, and Ajamil is kind of similar story to this King Pururava actually, because King Pururava was an emperor. He was saintly in that regard. He was pious, and Ajamil was actually a Brahmana. He had Vaishnava association. He led a pious spiritual life when he was younger, but he saw a prostitute and became very attracted and wanted to be with the prostitute. He married the prostitute. He had many children. Even until he was 80 years old, he was still having children. And this lust overcame him so much that he forgot all of his spiritual practice. He pushed away all the people that were involved in his life previously. But it was due to this association of saintly devotees, of devotees when he was younger, that actually, even though he gave that up later in life, it was so powerful it left an impression in his heart that he somehow or another thought, I'm going to name my last child Narayan after the Supreme Lord, even though he had no spiritual practice for decades in between. And since his association was so powerful, and by the mercy of that association at the time of death, he was able to remember his son and call out for his son's name, which is the Supreme Lord's name. And then this is a very interesting story, and the demons, or the representatives, not the demons, of Lord Yamaraj came, of the Lord of Death, to take him to the hellish planets to serve his punishment for all the bad deeds he did throughout his life. But at the same time, the Vishnu Dutas, the representatives of Vishnu from Vaikuntha, came to take him back to the spiritual world. And for the first time ever in history, this happened. And they looked at each other and said, what's going on? Why are you here? Why are you here? I said, that's Spider-Man meme. Oh my God. And they discussed amongst one another, the Yamadutas and Vishnu Dutas. And the Vishnu Dutas shared the philosophy of the potency of the holy name and the mercy of the Supreme Lord through the holy name. And they left, and Ajamil regained consciousness, and he remembered everything. So the story is often thought that it was the potency of the holy name that gave him a second chance. And it's true, it was, but through what means? How? The potency of the holy name was, he was able to have the benefit to chant the name of Narayan. He was able to remember him only because of the mercy of the devotees, only because he had the samskaras, the impressions of being with devotees when he was younger. And he was only given a second chance because of the association of the Vishnu Dutas. It states in the Bhagavatam that only because the Vishnu Dutas came, and by hearing them, it changed his mind entirely. It changed his faith. He was able to give up the other things on the weight scale. He was able to think about, okay, those aren't actually important. That's just something that I'm driven by my senses. I want some pleasure from my senses, so I'm driven by those things, so much so that I didn't realize what's actually important. And it gave him a proper vision. And in doing so, he gave up all of that. He had firm faith, he had nishta, and nothing else materially mattered at all. His goal was firm. So it's the benefit, or the potency of association, actually. It's more powerful, and really, just is more powerful, but it's overarching over anything spiritual that we do. If it's not in coexistence with association of devotees, association of something spiritual, then ultimately what we're trying to do, Maya is very strong. They'll become overcome. Lust is very strong. But when we're in more contact with spiritual association than we are with material association, ultimately it'll wash it out. Just like you have a dirty cup and you keep washing and washing it with water. Or if you're washing pots in the kitchen and you have a really oily pot and nothing's coming out, You scrub and you keep washing. Eventually it comes out. And that's how we have to flush out our system. We have so many years, so many lifetimes of association with matter, with Mother's material nature, with material energy. It's there for so many years that we can't think that just a little bit of association once a week, once a month is going to be enough to clear it out. It has to be constant. And this is why Krishna consciousness is a daily practice. It's hearing Bhagavatam every day, it's chanting Hare Krishna every day, and it's trying to be around devotees as much as possible. And that quality of the association has to be such that it helps us remember Krishna, helps us give up that which does not benefit us. So that's basically what I wanted to say in regards to this, but there are so many points that were made, there's so many verses we read. I'll be interested to hear what your thoughts are, any reflections or questions. Okay, so a question here and a question there.
You mentioned that 26 years of Krishna consciousness, but yet you're still not where you want to be. So you mentioned things around it, but I wanted to know what your realization is on it specifically.
My realization about that specifically. I mean, well, one, it's to be taken birth in the family of devotees, and to have the gift of being in association with devotees every day. First is due to past association. There's no other answer. It's because of previous life association with Krishna's devotees that I can be in this position today. And I feel it, of course, has an effect. I mean, I don't want to downplay that as not important. I guess my point more so was if I have 26 years of association, but one time someone asked Srila Prabhupada how long does it take to become Krishna conscious, and I think this has been asked to him in several occasions. There might be different answers, but I've heard 1 moment or 1 second or 1 minute or 100 lifetimes or hundreds of lifetimes, basically saying it could take as little as that or as long as many lifetimes. And I think it's also the quality of our endeavor and the quality of our sangha, of our japa, our kirtan, of all these things is very important. And but I guess my realization is 26 years thus far, how could I make the next 26 years much more absorbed? Because if it remains the same, then I missed the greatest opportunity I've ever had in the history of my existence. Because this is the greatest opportunity I have, for sure. I can't imagine a better opportunity to become Krishna conscious than right now. So 26 years in, who knows if there will be 26 years more, So I have to make sure that each day, whatever I'm doing is in support of my Krishna consciousness.
Thank you very much for the very thoughtful class.
Yes.
Something that you said really stuck out to me, that when you have this constant association, right? 24/7, you're associating with something, and you mentioned your mind. Are you listening to the voice of your mind? And that's really significant to me because, if you think about it, the voice of our mind, we are always associating with the voice of our mind, and and you got to be aware of what your mind is saying and kind of what its disposition is, because it can totally change what the value of your association with devotees, right? So if you are with a very advanced devotee and you're in their association, but your mind is I don't really like this person, then you're not going to get quite that benefit out of that. And if on the other side you're with materialistic people and your mind is it doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be dragged down. If your mind is hey, I see these materialistic people and I'm here and being polite and stuff on the outside, but inside I know this isn't where it's at, then that's not going to contaminate you as much. And then, but going back to like the association with, the advanced devotees, you also got to realize that like you have a particular nature. And so let's say you're associating with, a devotee who is very advanced, and this devotee is telling you like, oh, you really got to like sit and contemplate and like read these great texts, and like that's how you're going to advance. But you know that you personally, you want to be out there doing kirtan, doing book distribution, and like it's hard for you to really sit and read and contemplate for a long time. Then like if you're pushing yourself to be like, oh yeah, this saintly devotee says you got to do it this way, so I got to do it this way, and you're working against your own nature, that's also not really going to benefit you as much. So, and so in that case, it might be like, okay, like that's a good reminder that it's good to sit sometimes, when I can, and focus on these books to kind of round me out. But like different people have different natures. So you might want to find an advanced devotee who like recognizes that you have this, you want to go out and do kirtan and do book distribution, and kind of nurtures that in you, because that's going to inspire you and that's going to make you want to stay in Krishna consciousness. So it's like a lot of subtle things, and I think you really gotta, as you said, pay attention to your mind and pay attention to the different qualities of different devotees, and make sure that like everything's lining up well.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. It's once you get into the discussion of, we're talking about you want to fill your life with association, then there's so many nuances to it. What about your personality type? What do you like? What about the people you associate? Maybe some are devotees, but maybe toxic in your life. You can go on and on and on with that, and that's why it's something personal to each person. We associate what we hear, etc., etc. And to the mind point, thank you for catching that. First of all, we're not our mind, we're not our intelligence, we're not our false ego. And I was reading this story. It's in Mother Vishaka's book, on her memoirs of Srila Prabhupada, and she was saying there was somewhere, India maybe, or it was somewhere maybe it wasn't India, somewhere that there was a war zone going on, and there was no light, and the windows were blacked out, and there was just a small candle. And she likes to take notes, and she's trying to absorb as much as she can. She's trying to take as many notes as she can. And the candle was close to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was speaking. And she tried to get close, but it just wasn't enough light to write anything down. So she thought, okay, I'm just gonna hear as best as I can, remember it as much as I can as I want. She was saying she just really wanted to soak up as much as she could. She was really at a place where she wanted to take spiritual life really seriously and apply everything she heard. And so she was listening. The class finished, and she went outside, and she forgot everything. She's in that association of a pure devotee. She's trying, her mind is saying, okay, I'm here, I'm here in front of Srila Prabhupada, I'm ready to listen. It's the mind, you're not the mind, it just blanked out. And then she went to Jamuna Devi and she said, did you remember anything? And Jamuna said, no, I tried to also, my mind just blanked out. It just happens sometimes, we're not the mind, and it's okay. It's good then that we're not the mind. The mind is generally more negative than we are actually positive. And we're by nature jubilant, blissful beings. So it's nice to actually know we're not the mind. Thank you for those points about the subtleties and nuances of finding association. Thank you. Any other questions, or should we wrap it up? Oh, time. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm so used to Alachua with a different time. Yeah, of course. Okay, Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam ki Srila Prabhupada ki jai.